the history of Masonry is very much mysterious, because aside from it being formally acknowledged in the 18th century in England, right, well, 1717 or around that time, there's the history of the Rosicrucians, and then there's obviously the more mystical side, going back to so-called ancient Egypt, right? Hiram Abiff, the builder, King Solomon. So what is your understanding of the relationship of modern Masonry to ancient Egypt?
Well, it is curious, because most of what you'll see inside of a Masonic lodge is Judaism. You'll see Star of David, Star of Solomon. You will see, of course, Solomon's temple is what every Mason temple is based on. So most of the symbolism that you will see inside of a Masonic lodge is actually Jewish. But they also always have a lodge dedicated to Akhenaten in every Grand Lodge, like the Grand Lodge in New York, the Grand Lodge of Philadelphia, Australia, London. They all have a room dedicated to Akhenaten. Now, Akhenaten is one that has really shocked me as a study when I start to look into these origins of the secret societies. Because as you mentioned, the Rosicrucians, I picked up a little book called Unto Thee I Grant, written by the Rosicrucians. And the first page I start reading, I realized that it was Akhenaten that they claim founded the Rosicrucian order. Now, this got deeper and weirder and stranger all along the way the more I looked into this. Now, I don't know.
Israel will then appear as a universal sovereign, heralding truth and justice for peoples reduced to masses without personality, without freedom, without proper tradition. Such is, in brief, the plan contained in the protocols. There is, without question, a connection between the Jewish tradition and Freemasonry. In 1848, the Freemason von Nigg wrote, "The Jews have admitted that Freemasonry was a means to build their secret empire on a solid basis." To formulate an overall opinion on Freemasonry, various elements should be taken into consideration. It seems that initially, before the French Revolution, Freemasonry was above all an intact organization, more or less connected with Rosicrucianism and therefore with spiritual traditions deriving essentially from the High Middle Ages, Templars, the Fidelity d'Amour, and so on. It is only subsequently that Freemasonry assumed the militant features and the tendencies known by everyone, by means of a real distortion of the elements it had taken from the spiritual traditions that we have just referred to. But although this is not fully known to us, it is undeniable that Freemasonry, in its turn, played a part in the theoretical and also, according to some people, material preparation of the French Revolution, the first embryo of all subsequent anti-traditional upheaval in Europe. A second point, Marxism and socialism in general are creatures of the Jews, and the Jewish spirit and the main fathers and apostles of international social democracy are also Jewish. First of all, Karl Marx, and then Lassalle, Wolfson, Rosa Luxemburg, Launder, Kautsky, Singer, Elson, Bernstein, and Trotsky are Jewish indeed. Liberalism, combining with democracy, becomes Judaicized. And this union between liberalism and democracy has, once again, Jews as exponents. The pernicious action of similar ideologies continues in the pacifist doctrines. Those that tend to peace at any cost, without caring about whether peace might be more dangerous than a defensive war or a war of conquest. Doctrines which hold up to ridicule the ideal of a heroic death for the fatherland, whose highest scope and greatest value is a universal fraternity, with the utter subordination of any national and racial interest to the abstract interest of humanity. But this pacifist ideology is itself closely linked to Judaicized Freemasonry, and basically the League of Nations exactly reflects its spirit. The Jew Klee once wrote these significant words: "The League of Nations is not so much Wilson's work as it is a Jewish masterpiece, of which we can be proud. The idea of a League of Nations dates back to Israel's great prophets, their world outlook full of love for all humanity. In this way, the concept of the League of Nations is a true Jewish heritage. The main thing in the extremist form of anti-Semitism we are considering here is the idea that the Jewish influence would assume, depending on the cases and the places, either the one or the other of these forms which, even if they may seemingly be opposed to each other, would still proceed from a single intention and would cooperate in the fulfillment of an identical goal. The Jewish influence would thus develop either through pacifism or through militarism, either through capitalism or through Marxism. Frank writes, for instance, "The Marxist doctrine does not correspond to reality, but to the spirit and the need of Judaism, which only takes into account material and money matters and mocks any ideal and any spiritual superstructure. It is a leveling force launched against every racial and blood value." As to the active forms of Jewish subversive intervention, certain facts remain indisputable, such as that a Jewish influence has accompanied almost all modern revolutions. To sum it up, we see the convergent action of the anti-monarchical and anti-traditional revolts on the one hand, and of internationalist, pacifist, or social democratic egalitarianism on the other hand. Some anti-Semites even arrive at the view that the Great War itself, which ended with the collapse of the European states that maintained ancient aristocratic imperial constitutions to the highest degree, obeyed to a large extent the schemes of Judaism and was mainly sponsored by the English and American Jewish banks. And, in this respect, these words of a Jew, Ludwig, are really very significant. The collapse of these three powers, Tsarist Russia, monarchical Germany, and Catholic Austria, in their ancient forms meant an essential facilitation of the objectives of the Jewish policy. War was waged in order to impose on Central Europe modern political forms, that is to say democratic liberal ones, which was already in force in neighboring areas. The defenders of a separate peace with Russia could have saved the Tsar as well as the Kaiser and preserved, in this way, an unbearable Europe. In the previous pages, we have already mentioned what is real in the idea of the rise to power within the economy of the Jew, the spreading of liberalism and democracy, the destruction of whatever remains of tradition, would have simply been means of facilitating such a rise. Leaving aside the racial question, it is self-evidently nothing but the truth. Liberalism and democracy are mere myths. What is fulfilled through them is the change of power from the hands of the ancient aristocracies to those of capitalist oligarchies, industry, and high finance, i.e. the modern-day aristocracy. And that's what it comes down to. Who do you want leading the way? Philosopher kings or merchants? The Jewish element is overwhelmingly represented in positions of power within the worlds of industry and high finance. This is apparent even from a rigorously positive point of view. Karl Marx himself once wrote, "What is the foundation of the Jew in this world? Practical necessity, private advantage. What is his worldly god? Money." The Jew has emancipated himself in a Jewish fashion not only by acquiring financial power, but also through monies having become, with him or without him, the world power, and the spirit of the Jews having become the practical spirit of the Christian peoples. The Jews have emancipated themselves to the extent that the Christians have become Jews. The God of the Jews has become secularized and has become the God of the world. The bill of exchange is the Jews' real God.